That's the clap.
Yeah, all right. Welcome to Understand Tomorrow. This is your host, Kevin, and today I have the pleasure of hosting Kian. Kian is an avid learner, a technology enthusiast, and currently working on building quantum tech and the quantum internet at QuTech. Thank you so much for being here, Kian.
Thank you for having me.
So actually, we met at TNW 2019,
Yeah,
and we had a
true.
very nice conversation, and the energy was really nice, and we thought we would bring this on the show. Just for the audience, what are you doing? What are you involved in?
Yeah. So actually, it's really funny because actually right now we are at QuTech, right? At QuTech, I'm a PhD candidate. So I finished my master's a couple years ago and now working on as a PhD candidate in the group of Ronald Hansen, where I'm actually building a quantum internet between Delft and The Hague. That's the goal.
That's very exciting, and
Yeah.
we're going to dig into the nitty-gritty of it. And before that, I have a question that I ask all my guests, and that's about curiosity. What does it mean to you, and what is something that you're curious about?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that because the whole reason that I started in this field was because I felt I was curious about everything all the time. And of course, I get the standard, always asking your parents, what's this? What does that do? And at some point, their answers run out, right? But I kept asking questions, and I felt like I had this sort of all throughout high school, all throughout starting university, always asking more and more. And I think to me, curiosity is my sort of driving force into doing research, into getting somewhere, and I don't know where I'm going to end up, right? But I'm always asking questions, always asking for what's the next step, where does my research lead to, what can I do with it more? And I think it's that sort of that itch that you have all the time that also makes you work at it, right? You gotta you gotta scratch that itch.
Yeah.
But that's just sort of, for me, it's a bit more, I guess in the applied physics world, it's a bit harder to differentiate because I feel like all people here are always curious about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And but of course that translates back to work and translates back to doing that daily. But yeah, what I'm curious about right now, that's of course now I'm a bit possessed by sort of the work that we're doing here, and of course I would love to be able to look into the future and sort of in 10 years and see where sort of this research that I'm doing right now, what did it end up in, what sort of influence did it have on society at that point. And I hope it already has by then. But it's sort of the curiosity of what will sort of quantum tech look like integrated into society in the next decades. That's sort of my...
Yeah, I think it's
daily
really
question.
nice that you just follow your curiosity. I mean, I think it's going to lead you to a good place eventually. I think because really the good stuff comes when you're very intense, very obsessed about something because you just love it. You're fanatical about it. I think that's when you really start uncovering things that other people maybe didn't, because you have that interest in it in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so, we'll explore throughout the podcast just kind of like, what are you working on and kind of like, taking that 10, 20-year perspective on quantum tech and maybe some of the applications that they're going to be around it. Let's start with, let's say, just what's quantum tech?
Of course,
start
yeah.
there.
It's so hard when you're sort of in this engineering bubble all the time, and at some point it becomes sort of natural to understand that what it is or that everyone wants it, but what is it really? To me, it's the new wave of what sort of, now we're in the information age, and I feel like the next age is the quantum age. But because what we've done is we've taken part of physics that we knew existed, but now finally we've gotten to the point where we can use the sort of fundamental properties that physics at a sort of a very low and sort of very small level provides us and bend it to our will. And that opens up a lot more possibilities of things that now we can measure, research, and also compute at the end. And of course, I'm cutting a lot of corners here. What does that really mean, obviously? And I think that they're in large, you can distribute it over sort of a couple categories, namely the computing side, the communication side, and then sort of sensors and measurement side. And just like now, all our phones have sensors in them all the time. You got even a humidity sensor and a pressure sensor and a magnetic sensor that you don't really know or use about too much, but they're in there and they're used. But there's a lot more that you can, these sensors are sort of smaller and sort of, you can use for all these tiny things, but better sensors allow for better applications of certain technologies, even if it's sort of aimed at cameras or aimed at sort of sound recording, but also even now what we saw that there was lately in the news, right? That there was newer or that they found a particular substance in the rings of Venus, right, or around Venus, such that that there might be sort of signs of whatever something life-ish that might be there. Those things are measured, right, from a distance, and now they had trouble also sort of getting to the range of how certain are we that what we see is correct. But they have a certain uncertainty on what they see. Imagine that if now you would see that data as crystal clear as I see you right now, right? It's sort of those levels of advancements that you can expect in this sort of area of quantum sensors in that sense. And I know that's still very vague, obviously, because I'm not saying anything about what's the underlying properties of that. But to me, and that's also what QuTech is doing, is that we are actively trying to get all this knowledge and sort of lab advancements in how we bend this quantum mechanics to our will and try to find applications for that in real life.
Yeah. So my feeling is that, let's say, we'll get to, let's say, the state of the infrastructure and the technology as of now. But my feeling is, let's say that maybe this decade is going to be about specific applications of quantum technology. And then from then, hopefully that's going to incentivize business people to invest more in it and so on.
Yeah.
And then it's going to take off. Like so do we have quantum computers?
Yeah.
And how, I think you have something here at QuTech as well, right?
Yeah, no, that's why I have a resounding yes, because I mean, in this building, you have a couple computers.
A couple?
But the question is always, how do you define computer?
Right.
And in this case, there are computers, but they just have several bits, right? Several quantum bits.
You're right.
So, it's always a question. They're not anything like the computers that you and I use daily, but they're, in my opinion, and definitely computers because we can do computational things with them.
Right.
No matter how small yet, right? And they're in this building, but even also in other labs and at other companies, at Google and IBM, for example, they have quantum computers and they do computational physics with them. Yeah.
And, well, first, are these quantum computers, let's say whenever they come, are these going to replace what we have now, the infrastructure and the classical, let's say, ways of computing, or is it going to be more specific, or how is it going to go?
Yeah. Because this is a really good question, because there's just sort of this introduction of quantum computing into the world sort of happened with, in 10 years, we're going to solve global warming because we have a computer that can solve everything, right? Obviously, it's not the case. That would be a very, very fortunate, but unfortunately, it's not the case. Because much like the computers we have now are really good at solving very specific problems, they're also, these classical computers we have now are also really bad at certain other problems.
Right.
And as much so is the quantum computer good at solving specific categories of problems and really bad at doing others. So in that sense, the ongoing thought is, and it's definitely the first step at least, is that the up and coming sort of first application of real quantum computers will always be a hybrid version between a quantum computer and a classical computer.
Right. You
always need, because we're so much further advanced also in what a classical computer can do, we need a classical computer to send instructions to what this quantum computer should solve for it. It should know, this classical computer should know, okay, I have this huge calculation, it's going to take me a week, let's say. Or even, there are even problems that are not that hard to find, these problems, that you say, okay, my classical computer looks at it and says, I can't solve this. Like, it's impossible. But I can solve like the first 10% of it. Then there's like a blob of 50% that I cannot solve, and the rest is fine.
Yeah.
Then it should recognize, like, okay, let me do this first 10%, and then this 50% stuff, I know my quantum computer can solve. Send it out. Let this guy somewhere in the cloud compute this, bring it back to me, and the rest is sort of piece of cake, right? So this is the integrated future of what you can think of a hybrid classical quantum computer handoff back and forth system could think of.
So it does the heavy lifting, let's say, like
for certain things,
where it requires that, where things that would take weeks for a computer, this quantum computer could do pretty quickly.
Yeah, for some.
So I guess let's say, and then just what do you think are going to be some applications that you're seeing right now, or maybe that are going to be over the next decade?
Yeah, so
quantum computers.
One thing that a quantum computer could be really good at is in general sort of an optimization problem. There's things that require indeed looking at all the variables that exist and finding sort of the best out of it, the best solution out of it. And that runs from, like pretty much all of logistics is an optimization problem, right? You want companies to be, they want as little overhead on logistics as possible, to reduce costs or even maybe get sort of stuff out quicker. And it's those things that are really hard to optimize with classical computers. You always require actually sort of people to implement those even now very smartly, and you're never going to be as efficient as you can be, and you know that, but you're getting close. It's those type of problems that a quantum computer is really good at solving. It's even already known, like stuff like a shortest distance problem that should be relatively easy to solve. But that also means shortest distance can be not just in physical distance, but also, of course, maybe the shortest and most efficient path of, I don't know, your coal to be shipped. I don't know. We don't want coal, exactly. But
No, I get it. I get
it.
The point. Yeah, for sure. And so, and actually, you're working in a very specific area, the quantum internet.
Yeah.
So, just tell us more about that.
Yeah. So it's funny because I, in sort of the run up into where I ended up, I worked a lot on sort of the initial and parts of these quantum computing chips. Measured a couple computers in that sense, right? And you look at the performance of them and how they, how you project their performance to be if you would make them larger and better. And then kind of dawned on me, like, okay, now we have, we're going to have a decade of improving computation, right? But there has been very little talk on how am I in the end going to connect all these quantum computers together? And why is that more difficult than doing it now? Is because the quantum information that a quantum computer uses quantum states in the end. Those cannot be sent over a classical channel, meaning a classical internet, just like how you and I messaged before we met up here. It's that type of communication that, so the classical way that we talk, that's not a proper way of sending quantum information. Actually, not just a proper way, not just a not proper way, but it's just impossible.
It just doesn't work. Yeah,
it doesn't work. And so we need a different way of communicating, and that's where sort of the quantum communication comes in. And of course, not just, you don't want just one point to the other communication, but you want an interconnected service where, in the end, all quantum computers can be linked to each other, talk to each other, use each other as well, right? If you want a distributed computational platform in that sense, maybe clouds to be connected, or I have a small computer in this building, but I want it to be connected to a very, very much larger one that's on the other side of the world. Those things I want as well for my quantum hybrid sort of next wave of technology. And and that's really hard actually to connect quantum computers, and it hasn't really been done before. And of course you can say that about quantum computation as well, but there's definitely some inklings there that show that we're on the right path. But for connecting quantum computers together that hasn't been shown before over larger distance. So it has been done in this building, has been done across campus. We have sort of connected different computers together and checked that we indeed have these sort of quantum level of assurances that we're indeed sending, this quantum state, what a quantum computer uses. But this gets exponentially harder when you want to do it over larger distances. So not just a kilometer, but say 20, 30, 100 kilometers. and that's where my research is, what my research is about. So I'm working on a long distance communication form of connecting two computers together, basically.
Is the word internet a right way to describe it? Or I guess you're just moving things to the cloud, right? Ultimately, like that's, let's say, where things are heading.
I mean,
you could call it
initially. Initially it's a cloud, right? It will be concentrated in certain places in the world. But still, I'm not connecting to an AWS server by anything else but the internet. And so will these distributed quantum clouds also have to be connected through some system. And of course, you can argue perhaps on what your definition of internet is, but it's definitely a interconnected system of quantum computers is what I would call an internet, because that's the exact definition that we use now for a classical internet. So that's how I view it in the end. So it will be connected clouds, I guess.
And I know we don't want to dig into it too much, let's say into the technicals of it, but you talked about, let's say, sending quantum states. Can you elaborate just on that? Like how does I guess we didn't dig into, let's say, what makes it work, because I guess you can watch a bunch of videos that can do that a lot better, and we would have to go a lot into it. But just on a high level, what are these quantum states?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I think maybe the better starting point is a matter of how we communicate. And I think that will explain a little bit. Because just like so this level of communication uses a specific sort of fundamental property of nature, and it's called entanglement. And entanglement is just like electricity or just like sort of magnetism. Like it's just a fundamental part of nature that exists on the quantum level. And what it is that you can have correlations called between different quantum states that are, in that sense, perfectly correlated, meaning that you can sort of literally entangle. That's the only word there is. You can sort of connect, but it's entangle different of these quantum states, and then I'll get into what the quantum states sort of really, really could look like. And by manipulating them, you manipulate both of them at the same time, basically. So I do an action on one side, but an action on the other side happens simultaneously and in perfect correlation with the other. But that requires a lot of specific engineering in order to get these two entangled, really. So I can have a computer here, I can have a computer in The Hague, but I need to do something with these different computers in order to make them that connected like that. And to maybe then go into, but what is then a quantum state, right? It's I would say, a packet of where the information is. Now we have information stored in bits. For a quantum computer, information is stored in a quantum bit. That's not just 0 or 1, but can be a superposition of 0 and 1, it's called. So it have weights in it. It's a mix of 0 and a mix of 1 at the same time. And only by observing this quantum state, so actually performing a measurement, I'm asking the computer, hey, what are you at this point? It will give me back I'm either a 0 or a 1, depending on the weights that are given to them, and then the statistics that come with that. And the fact that you can now have this mix of 0, 1 allows you to construct a very large sort of space of possibilities. Because, right, I have this full range of 0 and 1s between 0 and 1s that I can use, but if I add several qubits to it, you can imagine that sort of space of possibilities that you end up with that increases exponentially. So with very little amount of qubits, you can reach a very sort of large computational space in which I can find solutions. And it's those states that in the end, so you construct a quantum state in which you do these computational things. And it's that state that then in the end has to be transmitted to another place. And that's where this communication comes in.
And my feeling is that, let's say, to achieve these quantum states right now, you can't have a normal environments. We just passed by, you had something called, let's say, like a fridge-like, going down to 0 degrees. And is that because it has to have a certain environment for this to work? Or how does that work? Yeah,
good question. Because you would just, say, okay, why don't I just make a couple of these states and start computing, right? It sounds easy enough. I also now have quantum bits that I can use and store, and I have a hard disk in my backpack, right? It doesn't sound hard. These quantum states are extremely fragile in that sense. They're very engineered to have the properties that I want, but they have the problem that the fact that I have interacted with them to get them to the point where I want them to be also means that other parts of a chip or sort of anything in the surroundings can also interact with that state. And all interaction with that state requires it to basically add an error to it. And an error that I may or may not be able to sort of see that it has an error. And if I don't see it, then at some point I lose the information that's in my quantum bits.
Yeah, so it compromises it and then you can't work with it because of that.
Yeah, basically. And the time frames at which you can think of that differ between different applications of quantum bits. But they nowadays range sort of anything in between 100 microseconds to milliseconds or seconds. That's sort of the different applications that they have a range of how good they can store information and for how long they can store it. And if you take the 100 microsecond one, it's really short, right? In our world, 100 microseconds is ages because we do stuff on nanosecond level. So that's 10 to the 5 nanoseconds, right? So there's a lot of time, 10,000 nanoseconds that I can use. Or sorry, 100,000. But still, if I want to do a computation that requires a week, then 100 microseconds is not enough. So it's indeed that these states, they need to be protected, and therefore they require sort of a very stable and very quiet environment. And that's what you see, what you saw in those fridges. And you can Google them if you look at fridges or sort of quantum chips from Google and IBM. They have really good sort of pictures of what that internally looks like. And they go to 15 millikelvin. It's almost absolute zero temperature. You don't want any thermal influences. You don't want any magnetic influences. No electrical influence. It's all very sort of stable environment, engineered to be extremely stable and only react to what we send in.
Yeah, exactly. So you control all the variables to make sure that it works. And do you foresee that we're going to be able to make this work in a normal environment anytime soon?
I wouldn't say anytime soon, and anytime soon being in the next 5 to 10 years, that these high performance computing things that are happening now, they happen indeed at this 15 millikelvin.
So there's no computer, even with very little computational power, that runs on qubits that works out of this environment.
Now I feel like I'm being put on the spot because there's so many, but
probably not.
I dare to say that they're not, but these are very specific applications where you use a certain platform where room temperature level does require you to do some things, but it's very rare. And if you can do it now, you won't be able to do much. So anything that's now useful and up to sort of a level that you let's say cutting edge, you require this low temperature. And even the chips that Google, IBM have, they require something called superconductivity, which means that it's a very specific thing, but it's a property of metal that changes to having no electrical resistance below a certain temperature. And it requires that just like that, right? We said that the quantum states are very fragile. They don't like heat, or they don't like resistance in general of they need to be able to roam sort of free but protected. That's where the superconductivity comes in. You have no resistance. It's a very stable environment.
Yeah, and I guess when I was just digging on this in my own time, just that whole concept of entanglement was super fascinating. So like across different distances, it doesn't matter. Like these on the fundamental level are connected, right?
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, on the fundamental level, they are the same state. So I always see it as a sort of spread out. It's one thing. So I know it's really it takes any physicist years to sort of try to form a clear idea of this, and then still, if I don't think about it for a couple months, then you still have to reach back and like, okay, well, what is it really? I always envision it as if this quantum state is sort of spread out over this arbitrary distance that you talk about. So, and that is easy to imagine when it's really close together, when it's like nanometers apart, because then you think, oh, it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But as soon as it's 20 kilometers away, yeah, it's really hard to imagine
how are they even connected?
How are they connected? How are they the same? How do they form one entity, basically? But yeah, that really is the case, and we've proven that is what it is, and this is the fundamental property of nature that we try to again sort of bend to our will, because that entanglement really doesn't want to be there in a way, but we force it to, and we keep it there for a limited amount of time, and then use it, right? So then, what happens if you then observe one side? That entanglement goes away. So you force then the other. Right, we talked about in this sort of
the superposition,
because they're correlated. That if I look at one and I get a measurement outcome, that I know that the other one will have
the same
gone
state
in the other, or at least in a correlated state. Right?
Okay,
it could be the same or another, as long as it's always the same type of either this one is plus and that one's minus, or up and down, and it's always a correlated system. But this entanglement, that is what gives you that communication power, and people often think that it allows you to do faster than light communication, because it's sort of entanglement also allows teleportation, something like that. And these terms, we hear them thrown around in sci-fi and in all these areas, but unfortunately, communication faster than light is impossible. At least as far as we know now, fingers crossed. But that fundamental part of the boundaries in which we can work still holds. So,
and do you entertain some of these sci-fi ideas in terms of teleportation and the likes? I mean, I think increasingly we see some of the stuff that we thought was impossible. It's starting to be possible. I mean, what are some things that, let's say, you tell people and they're just like, no way that's possible, or that could be possible?
Yeah, maybe I can already tell you that. I mean, we do state teleportation. So we do we prepare a certain level of quantum state, a certain information, and then we teleport it to a different location
instantaneously.
And that's the thing, and that's what I mentioned before, is that it's not in a sense instantaneous, but not really, because I still need to send over part of the information in order for you to understand what you're seeing. So in the end, you're still capped by the light travel. So I still need to send. I still need to shout to you, or I need to send you a message, or just send light with it, or something that is within this boundary of the faster than light. Within the boundary of the light speed. So,
which is another fundamental rule, I guess. Here
exactly.
we cannot break these rules, so it makes sense.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Never say never, but no. Not
I think over time, I mean, a lot of the things that we know over time it's maybe we're going to find different perspective, or we're going to find new information and we alter the theories. But from what we know so far, it's fair to say it's capped at the speed of light, right?
Yeah. That one's been pretty strong so far.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's funny because I don't think in the end, usually physics laws aren't broken, but more like circumvented, I feel like. So if there are things that we previously thought weren't possible, then usually it's because something happens that's outside of the scope of what we've described of it so far. We used to think that the time wasn't relative, meaning that if I travel really fast, then my clock goes slower than yours, meaning that I age not as fast as you do, but with respect to each other. And it's that relativity that we didn't think existed before Einstein described it, right? So it's not that we didn't think it was sort of possible, but it just added a layer of physical law theory to it. So and then so far faster than light travel is not or travel, or even travel of information, or travel of people, that we think definitely has that. But if I can poke a hole in the space-time continuum, maybe it's possible, because I'm not adhering to the laws of that this space-time that's around us describes. So maybe I can step out of that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I mean.
So on this note, so I find your fields fascinating. I mean, it's there's so many open questions.
Yeah.
And so I mean, you probably, at the end of the work, when you, or let's say, 1 week, a month, a year in, you have more questions than answers, probably.
Daily.
Exactly.
Daily, yeah.
So I find that quite nice. I mean, and I think it ties back into the curiosity aspect of it. I mean, you have to be curious to continue to ask the right questions and seek the answers.
Yeah.
And on this note, I'm curious. Can you tell us about, let's say, a myth that's about your field, or so, that you want to debunk, that maybe some people, maybe some of our audience, they have just from listening to the media or their friends about quantum? Like, what is a myth that you would like to debunk?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think we touched upon a couple already. So physical teleportation of people, you hear teleportation. So it's not physical teleportation of people, but teleportation of quantum states or of information. So that's, I think, but that's maybe more of a funny thing. Like, I don't think anyone actually thinks that you can teleport a person yet. I think a big myth, we talked about it in the beginning with computing, right? That it's not a one-stop solve thing for everything. People think that they will have a quantum computer in their hand, that with a push of a button, I can get a personalized medicine from it that will fix me for anything. That's definitely not the case. And I don't know if this is what the general consensus already is, but quantum computing is really hard. And this field is really is just starting. Even though the theory has been around for literally 120 years, the actual engineering and applications at the level that we see now is just getting started. And for anyone expecting that there will be a functioning quantum computer sort of, with millions of qubits in the next 5 years is sorely mistaken.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? It's not, I don't want to have to... Sometimes I'm a bit afraid that we're sort of running with this marketing machine of like, we need to... that this field always requires more engineering and more innovation and more funds to do that. But you can't promise, nobody does really, but we can't expect from this field that it will be sort of already done in like 5 to 10 years.
And I guess that's why, it's, to be honest, it just needs time and investment. And just even artificial intelligence and things as such, it had its time period where it was, let's say, things were developing at a rapid pace, and people long time ago were talking about how that's going to accelerate and things will change quickly. But truthfully, it's gonna take time. Like even now, let's say the algorithms are the same, but we can just process a lot more data.
Right.
And over time, yes, we're going to get to something that resembles general artificial intelligence, but it's far into the future, at least as it seems now. But there are very specific applications that are let's say, that have a lot of potential. I guess that's going to be the same thing for quantum tech, right?
Totally. And I think it ties into, because obviously I don't know how life was 50 years ago, but I honestly think it ties into the fact that because we're so interconnected and because information travels so quickly, that we have the feeling that everything moves quicker. At least I do. I don't know how this is also for the older generation, if they had the same feeling back then. But everything moves quicker, and also our expectations need to be satisfied earlier, right? And sooner all the time. But but if you look at the development of the computer or development of the internet, the computer is really sort of 70 years old at this point, and the internet is actually still relatively young, so it already was quicker. But let's call it 25 years, order of. So that's already half. The problem is that that level of speed up is not sustainable, right? Because if now, let's say we go in the order of every time we speed up with a factor of 2, right? So it's 50 years for computer, 25 for the internet, 10 years for quantum. No, that's already right. Or maybe 10 years for artificial intelligence. It's also not going to happen. So there's definitely a limit to that. And especially when you move into different fields. So when you move into something that's orders of magnitude harder, artificial intelligence, really hard. I don't think anyone has the path to a solution yet, right? In general, the same thing for quantum computation. So it's and quantum internet for that as well. So it's
so people should have reasonable expectations, but also be curious about it, because I think once we do have certain breakthroughs, or even just the specific applications that have potential over this coming decade, I think those are very exciting.
For sure, because it's not something that happens on its own.
I mean, exactly.
You need people like you and me talking about it. You need sort of world leaders also interested in that, and making sure that it's sort of a path that you can that you can follow, and that needs education and funding and hopefully, and that's an industry that's rising up, but that a quantum industry is also very important, obviously, because it's cool that we do stuff in the lab, but it needs to be economically viable as well to do so at the end of the day.
Right, and I think maybe at this point, there's not as much funding as there should be for something of this, because let's say there's not some immediate gratification or economic benefit from a business, or for some there are, but there's to kind of pour a lot of money into it and develop that, right? So let's say funding is probably an issue to some extent.
Yeah, and at least it's not necessarily an issue, but don't expect a return on your investment now in 2 years, right? That's not the case. And especially you see this with these larger companies as well, with the technology companies, that they have to throw heaps of money at it, but expecting that in the long run, of course, it's definitely going to pay off. And luckily now, in Europe, we're doing actually also really well with the quantum flagship program that they announced a couple years ago, that distributes funds across Europe for quantum technologies to be developed, and that's already a really good start. I think all major world economics major. Let's call it countries, or I mean China and US, let's just call them. They also fund this actively, and I think now it's a race to who will get there. Well, I won't say first, but who will get the lead in building an industry around this, or building a technological advantage around this. But I think we're doing really good, but I don't want to lose momentum. So I think that's always a problem with these rising fields, and you kind of see this with all things that become maybe a hype, but also do have some long-term benefit if you do it well, that the initial interest and funds are relatively high, but as soon as it doesn't pay off immediately, you don't want to lose momentum, because you know that the potential is there. You just need to get it out, but you need more people also to do more time spent on it in order to get there.
Right. The momentum is important. And things do lose momentum. I mean, again, artificial intelligence is one. I mean, for a good number of years, it was out of favor in the sense that it wasn't very interesting for people.
No.
And then now, I think the statistic was every 3.5 months, the money spent on machine learning doubles. So that's pretty exponential, at least. Yeah. And now people are taking an interest in it again, but it actually went through ups and downs, probably maybe 3 different phases of renewed optimism and funding. And so things go through these cycles, but if you can keep the momentum going, then, good things happen faster, I think. But going to, let's say, actually, is there a link between what quantum can do and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, to me there is. because one of the other things that a quantum computer is really good at is solving matrices, math matrices. And that really is all that machine learning is as well. It's just gathering a whole lot of information and run it through a circuit of matrices in the end of the day, and out rolls a response. But it's also that building of the network and sort of that training of the network is now something that's computationally very intensive.
That's right.
And eventually a quantum computer is, interestingly enough, just by design, just by the fact that it's the properties that it uses, it's really good at solving matrices and doing math operations on these matrices. And that's all that a machine learning algorithm at the end of the day with training or your computational unit does, is solving math problems. So I think that really ties in well. And this is the field that is then called quantum machine learning. That sort of split into two things, where you either use machine learning to help build a better quantum computer. So it's the other way around. So you use what's already there. You try to optimize chips, or you try to optimize designs, or sort of try to make it better in that sense, because maybe there are solutions that you haven't thought of. We actually have a running pilot from a colleague, Matteo, of mine, who built or trained a neural net on a simulated system such that we can control our experiment better. Right? So that's also something, right? This is already sort of quantum machine learning, even though we don't like to call it that because it's relatively simple still. But it's using machine learning to do our quantum experiments better. But the other way around is what we just mentioned, is that then I can use quantum computers to enhance machine learning in that sense.
Yeah, that's very exciting. How are you thinking about artificial intelligence? Is this something that you're also fascinated about and maybe looking into? Or maybe it's on the periphery, or you're just watching it?
Yeah, I think I'm watching it from a distance, because I always keep an eye out for the quantum aspect of it, just because I feel like I can understand that much better. But it's definitely something that has proven to have really good use cases and examples where machine learning in general is being used. Although I personally don't like throwing around the word artificial intelligence so much, because to me, maybe because I'm more used to the math in that sense, that I don't really see it as an intelligence, but just as a smart setup of math.
No,
right, at the end of the day.
I completely resonate with you in the sense that, like, the algorithms haven't gotten that much better. We are able to feed a lot more data into it,
right,
and get better results. But like fundamentally, are these intelligent? It's just we can, now we can process a lot more, a lot faster, and we have a lot more data to feed those algorithms, so they're better.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, these are not machines that are learning and taking, let's say, unstructured data and kind of making something out of that in a meaningful way. And they're not thinking outside of their specific set of problems that they can solve.
Yeah.
So, would you call that artificial intelligence, or just, very good algorithms and very good data processing problems that we can solve? I think that's, let's say, that's, I guess, up to you to see whether you would define that as artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's almost more a philosophical question than, I guess, an applied question in that sense. But it's, you're right. It's definitely, at some point you're in the gray area, and you don't know yet that you're in the gray area, I guess. And then maybe at some point you are. But I think it's that active component that I feel like is always missing. So it's always people at the end of the day that steer algorithms in a certain way. And I think that's fine, because I definitely think that that the brain is still one of the best computers that we have around. Although it's really bad at some things, and then the machine learning takes over.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the combination we have is still pretty good.
I think so, right? So the concept of collective intelligence, and that the fact that we can actually do things better than machines, and machines can do better things than us, and together, if we are able to integrate, we can do. The outcome is much better than if either one was trying to go at it alone. It's a bit comforting because nowadays, it's all the talk that, let's say, machines are going to replace us, or that machines are going to that they're just going to be better than us on a lot of different aspects. But arguably, at least for the foreseeable future, 10, 20, 30 years, I would say maybe even my lifetime, that's a lot more. But
hope so.
Maybe, who knows, 80 years or so. But I feel like probably we're going to increasingly integrate with these machines and find a balance. I do find it difficult to see, but although a breakthrough could change that, let's say general artificial intelligence, and then we move to a completely different area where, things we can't even imagine, could be possible, are possible. But that's, again, an abstraction, and people talk a lot about that. How are you thinking about general artificial intelligence? You think that's far into the future? How are you thinking about it? Some people look at it as, once that happens, robots will just kind of continuously improve themselves exponentially, and we're going to lose control. Not to say it's going to be good or bad, but we're going to lose control. How are you thinking about that?
Well, it's actually to tie into this a bit, because I will try to answer your specific question. But what I always found really funny is that many years ago I read this sci-fi book, and it was about, part of it was about that, and this was taking place many years in the future, whatever, 200, 300 years, where the whole point of the book was that they tried for decades, humans tried for decades to build an artificial intelligence, and they threw sort of every resource they had at it, and they failed. And they realized sort of that it wasn't possible. And then what they tried instead was that they instead threw all those resources at augmenting the brain, pretty much, with a computer. And realized that that's so much more beneficial than trying to make artificial intelligence, but to enhance the intelligence that's already there. Pretty much, right? Just like we said before, our brain is really bad at certain things. Sometimes I feel like, also your body does certain things that you can't control, even though it's weird because you're the body, right? Maybe it's much better in order to add a computational unit to it that can do all the other things that I cannot, and therefore I have this perfect unison already. So I really like that approach, because it's sort of, at some point, it explores the possibility of, what if it isn't possible? Then what are we even doing right now? Should we focus on other things maybe? Of course, I think in the real world here, we already do things simultaneously. We already try to augment the brain. We already try to build artificial intelligence. It doesn't have to be one or the other, in my opinion. But okay, let's put that aside. So let's say it is possible. That's fine. And it's many, many years down the line, hopefully. Or maybe not, hopefully. That's the question.
I would say hopefully, because if it does spiral a lot of control, or at least we have to build it responsibly. Like, we have to understand, why are we building it? Not just build things for the sake of building. I mean, we've been doing a lot of that. But also build with purpose, and build in a way that is going to lead to a good outcome. Not to mutually assured destruction, or who knows, maybe we can weaponize this, or, I think if we build it, this is something that I hope personally is going to be built a bit slowly, so that we can build it in the right way.
Right.
I'll put it that way, because it sounds like it could be very powerful.
Sure, and I think the building slowly will not be a problem, because it's such a hard problem. Exactly. So I think it's fine. But I'm also not entirely hopeful in the sense that people haven't really proven to do well in crises in general. I don't think that you can expect people to be extremely responsible with this in the long run, right? And there'll definitely be as with all things in life, I feel like definitely people will be extremely responsible, and then there will those who won't be. And now there's the question that those who won't be, how detrimental will the influence of them be on the rest of the world?
Right.
And I think that's always the battle between good and evil, between having good security and then a hacker trying to circumvent the security. And so far, the battles have been pretty 50-50 in that sense.
Yeah, pretty fierce as well.
Pretty fierce, but no no extreme casualties, one or the other side, right? And I'm not sure if something like this can tip the scales one or the other. If one side has sort of an edge, or a level of absolute power that the other refuses to use, one of those strange scenarios where ethics are being violated left and right, but one side refuses to.
So you feel like, let's say, the humans are going to be the problem of how they put this to use, more than the algorithm itself will improve itself exponentially, and then just going to maybe even, let's say, the way we've built it has inherent biases, or it starts, let's say, taking what we tell it to do and then just takes it to a whole new level. Or so what are some of the things that you're saying that you're like, yeah, like that's something we should keep an eye out for?
No, I think in general, people, we understand ourselves too little to try to project those same ideals on something that we've created. It's already hard enough, I feel like, I don't know, I don't have children, but I already feel like it's hard enough trying to raise children well, right? It's not an easy task. And already that is a sort of I wouldn't say an artificial intelligence, but a intelligence that you have to bring up, but it can make its own choices. And but I feel like for something so specific as something that we have engineered, I'm not sure. I don't trust the humanity in that sense to do well enough.
Yeah.
I know that sounds a bit pessimistic, maybe, because there are also many things, of course, that humans do extremely well and compassionate that you don't see other even animal species do as much as we do. So there are definitely parts of that, but that's, I think, where we come back to this good and bad side, right? For sure, you would be able to beneficially use it, but you have to believe in the goodness of people in order to.
Yeah. So are you worried about this or not really? It seems just too far into the future.
Yeah, I'm not worried, not yet.
Because I think there was an interesting perspective on it where he's. I think, I'm not exactly sure who, but essentially was talking at like you should be worried. Why? Because even if this is, 300, 400, 500 years down the line, like the consequences are so great that we have to start working on it now. Essentially, if someone, aliens came down and told you, 500 years, we're going to be invading the planet,
right?
You would worry and you would, prepare for it very thoroughly. But when we talk about artificial intelligence, because it's so abstract and so far into the future, it just never, it doesn't even feel like, focus on the present, focus on solving real problems. And then, eventually, hopefully we're going to, make good use of it. But I think the other perspective is that, let's say, it does have that exponential potential. I think the idea is basically this. If we're going to keep improving, which we will, because it's just human nature and because there's so much benefit from doing that. Yeah. So if we keep down the road that we have, which is, even if it's incremental, even if it's super incremental, like it's going to take us 500 years to get there. Yet if you do believe that eventually we will crack the code and we will have this, then the idea is you should be worried about it, because we will keep doing that. And even if it's incremental, it's going to take time. But once we will, if we don't develop it the right way, and if we don't have the right system and to deal with, and if we don't start working on it now, then down the road, it's going to spiral out of control and it's going to have huge repercussions. Let's say that's the other side of the story. I mean, myself, let's say from a business perspective, I think it makes sense to be practical and focus on the problems that we have here and deal with those, and kind of just do your role in that aspect and just, be responsible about it. But I thought that was, let's say, that's the other perspective. And Elon Musk and the likes, they entertained us and they feel very worried about, let's say, what could happen once this takes off. And on Elon Musk, actually, so two things. Well, first thing, I had a podcast with Marco Corradine early this year. He works in the government. And he had this perspective, let's say, that kind of ties in with what Elon Musk is saying, that we're feeding these networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these networks, our data, and essentially collectively programming the artificial intelligence of the future. Let's say that was, what Marco brought up and ties in with Elon, and Elon kind of did say that would collectively program the AI. And how do you feel comfortable with that? Like, do you feel like we're feeding all these small group but very powerful companies our data, and are you comfortable with that?
No, not at all. No, and I think a growing number of people feel the same way, especially when it happens without active consent, right? So that I think that's most of the issue, is that some people aren't bothered by huge data collecting. But I think most of them would like to be told that it happens, and I think this is what one of the big revelations was when Edward Snowden blew the whistle on this. That people were shocked that it was happening, and everyone was like, "Okay, maybe I knew, but I wasn't. I didn't know it was on this scale and this level." I think that the level of that the amount of people that consent to this amount of data taking is shrinking, but not entirely sure if there's anything that they do, or I mean, they definitely can do, but if they actually do something to prevent it from happening. There are a lot of tools available to do so, but I'm not sure many people actually do.
Yeah, and I think another point he brought up that I thought was quite interesting, because I myself didn't think about it that way. So it's one thing to say individually, be concerned about your data, which is increasingly people are more aware and taking action in that sense. I try to use a browser that, hides my stuff, and I try to consciously think about what I'm putting out there.
Yeah.
And I think, an increasing amount of people are doing that. But then there's also let's say the other side of the thing, which is not you as an individual, but collectively with what can they do to, let's say, skew the election, or how can they kind of manipulate data that they have on a lot of people and groups of people and use that against you. And then, of course, over the long term, are we kind of feeding these algorithms, and kind of like, is this going to bite us back, far into the future? But then I guess these are just harder to deal with, these collectivist type of problem versus my own. I can take care of what I put out there. But I think in terms of the collective side of the things, it's just about making people aware of it. And I think everyone can take a few steps to just be more mindful of what they put out there. And then I guess that's what we can do. And then also having discussions and holding these organizations accountable.
Sure.
I think that's probably what we can do, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, if you want everyone to enjoy the level of freedom, at least that we have, I don't think that there isn't really a way besides letting people still make their own choices. Right? So if they want to give all their data to the artificial overlords,
right?
I mean, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe you don't want to do that, but maybe somewhere down the hall does want to, or at least maybe doesn't mind. Maybe that's a different thing. Maybe not everyone wants to actively do this, but maybe they don't mind it happens. Don't think we can do much then. Sort of, indeed,
just educate
if
people,
we're all
basically
aware of what's happening.
That's true. Yeah, indeed.
I think then it just goes where it goes, because from economic principles in general already, that it's go somewhere what the collective decides to do or to go to.
Yeah.
I've also, actively used Facebook for a long time, but at some point I also I stopped, right, in that sense, because I became more conscious, became more educated.
So then I guess it's just, let's say, what we can do is just educate people, help them understand that it's going to have an impact.
Okay, but maybe if I play devil's advocate, right? Is it enough that do we then we come back to, do we trust people to then make still the right choice, in the sense that then we have decided maybe a bit what is the right choice, right? If we have decided, okay, this huge data collecting is wrong, and we don't want
to be part of that.
Yeah, we don't want to be part of that, but maybe we don't want others to be part of that as well, because maybe I will be in the end influenced by what happens
down the
by
line,
their actions,
exactly,
or down the line, and maybe they're negatively influenced, but they just don't know it yet. But then I make a judgment, right? Then I already decide this is bad, and I should want to prevent others from attributing to that?
Yeah. I mean,
that's a tough question.
It's a tough question.
I'm not sure if I have the answer to that.
It's the same as, let's say, wearing masks nowadays. The governments that, let's say, have imposed masks on its population and everyone wears it, it works because of that. Masks would not work if you make it voluntary and, I'm wearing one, but you're not. Also because these are just very light, so they kind of just mostly protect you from me if I wear it. So everyone wears it, then you kind of lower the risks like quite substantially. Think here as well, like if some people continue to feed the algorithms, and that's going to have, let's say, an impact on the collective level because of things that those organizations can do with the data, even if they don't intentionally do it. Then it's going to essentially compromise my freedom.
Right.
And so then there's a question, countries like China would be happy to answer that, and they just say, we just tell them exactly what to do and we set the rules. But then in the Netherlands, we live on completely the other side of the spectrum, in the Nordics here, and where it's people have their own choice. So I think eventually people will have a choice as they do here, and we don't know what that outcome will be. But at least on a personal level, we take comfort in knowing that, hey, we are protecting, we're doing what feels right to us,
Right, and that's something that I wanted to comment on before from what you said, is that, like, okay, maybe if down the line something is influenced by what we do now, I mean, it definitely will, but you say, let's be conscious, and maybe in 500 years, maybe we should act now. That's what sort of the angle that you took. What I find so difficult about that is that how would I know what influence it has later? What I do now, what sort of influence it has later? Maybe I think I'm doing the right thing. In the end, it won't. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it is the right way. There are so many variables that come into play, especially in tens of years, hundreds of years, that we have no clue about, or even in a sense that, again, humans are pretty bad at extrapolating what happens with certain policies that you do or certain choices that you make daily. So even though that's really hard of being a person in general, I guess, of like, okay,
dealing with all these things, 10, 50, 100 years down the line. I mean, we're just not made for that, like, fundamentally. For sure. Yeah. So actually, in fact, I read an article recently that talked essentially, why are these sustainability initiatives or some of the things that we're trying to do, why are they not working? Because people need to see like an immediate impact, a result in their life, where they know that, like, the action I'm taking today has an impact, and they have to be able to see and feel that. And maybe there's ways to go about that, but certainly sustainability, of course, that you feel that a lot more, and it's it's around you, and increasingly people are being aware of it. But I think that's the fundamental problem. I mean, people need some sort of feedback loop that is not 100 years down the line, for sure, for this to work, and for people to build that into their habit. And right now it's mostly my paranoid friends that go full on and try to, like, make sure 10, 20 years down the line, they don't have like a complete profile of them, and they can't use that against them. But at
the end of the day, that's all you can do now, I guess.
Exactly.
It's just try to make the right choice of what you think there is, and that's the beauty then again of people, is that I feel like we're really good problem solvers in general. So if shit hits the fan, then I think we'll always find a way to solve it.
Yeah. And that's true. Eventually we will find it. I mean, this is, we're in that constant stream of creating and solving different problems, and I guess that's what makes it really nice to be human in the first place. You're especially, you're working your ass off solving all sorts of big problems. So that and it's funny because we say that, okay, it's really hard to determine what happens in many years, but I mean, I'm not doing this to get results in a year, but I'm doing this because I hope and I expect that I can have a certain specific and hopefully impactful influence in the next 5 to 10 years. So and maybe beyond that. So I'm personally like, I need, let's say, some sort of quick feedback loops. Let's say myself, I mean, I'm fine. Let's say if I start working something that I know will pay down, 10 years down the line, I'm okay with that.
Right.
But I do need to see some things in between to kind of keep me going. What about you? Like, how do you stay motivated knowing that, let's say, this might pay off long into the future? How do you on a daily basis stay curious and motivated to keep doing what you do?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes I think it's a bit vague for external parties not in this field to understand what we do, of course, on a daily basis. It's really hard to explain, I guess. But just as any other type of work, we have, just like you said, we want results. You take your small victories. You're curious about a certain problem that you want to tackle that day. Why don't I see a certain signal on my screen, even though I think everything that I've set it up to do should give me the signal? It's a super tiny problem, perhaps, but will have, of course, a impact in the end.
Yeah, so you break it down into smaller problems, and daily you have something that, let's say, you want to achieve, and that keeps you going, because you have small steps towards the bigger picture.
That's exactly true. Yeah, and the larger steps that we take is that we do research, and then at the end we ask questions beforehand. We do the research, and then we get a result, and we publish about the result. So that's usually in increments of like the level of year, say, that you get some gratification. Right. Okay, I've solved something, and this is good. As soon as it runs longer than years, then you run into issues, of course, because that's tough. But sometimes it's for the greater purpose with this project as well. Like, it had to be built up, and has been building now for almost 2.5 years or so. And only now we're starting to see the result of that in the end of the day. And it just requires a lot of build up, a lot of foundation to get there.
I think the good thing is, you're super young. So the runaway for you is long. And so you will eventually see the results of your work. Like, you will, that's good, that you're so young. And so you're going to be able to keep working on it and see how it evolves over time. I think that's quite fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure. And but it's definitely hard to keep... like you said, how do you really stay motivated every day? I think it's back to that curiosity level. It's just those little problems that are extremely fascinating at the end of the day. To me, why I see what I see, and why, and when you've solved something, of course, it does feel nice. And but there are definitely issues with trying to keep that attention span going sometimes. And then you just learn you have to force yourself to do so, or maybe take a step back. Or discuss with some other people with interest in different fields, and maybe get some... Yeah, exactly. It's always learning.
Always fine-tuning yourself, let's say, where you want to put your energy and attention.
For sure.
So let's kind of like rewind. Just for you, so how long have you, let's say, been on this career path?
Yeah, in terms of years, it's a bit strange. So in the sense that I think as when I started my master's is when I really decided to pursue this path fully. And then I took a little bit of a detour because I co-founded the Delft Hyperloop team that's here. That's a very much engineering project where we competed in the SpaceX Hyperloop Pod Competition organized by Elon back then. We won that, and that was really exciting, but that was very much engineering. But then I went back to my roots and did sort of, I think in total, you can say like, I spent like a year and a half, 2 years in the field of quantum computing, say. I did an internship also at Microsoft in the US at the quantum architecture department. But that's like 3 months or so. And then now I've been in this work for like a year in quantum internet related. So, but it feels much longer to me that I've been in this field for some reason. I don't know entirely why that is, but I feel very much at home. So I feel like I'm still very much at the start of this career, obviously, because I see people around me that are much further down the line and can have or have a much larger sort of influence in the field like that. I feel like I'm lacking knowledge in every aspect, but that's also what drives me to be able to learn more every day and want to learn more. But I am very much convinced that this is where I want to continue in the next decades.
Okay, so 2 questions. First, I want to dig a bit deeper in that Hyperloop thing.
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't give that enough attention.
No, we don't need to. But we can. Yeah.
And then I think the second thing, just what is one thing you wish you had, or maybe just a number of things that you wish you had known, when you started your masters? What would have you told yourself if you could go back?
Yeah, I think in our masters, or in general, what in applied sciences in general isn't really appreciated as much as in, let's say, the world of business. It's just networking, and I mean between people and contacts and talking to people and seeing what they do and understanding what type of interconnectivity they have with other people or with other industries. Because we like to be very, we here like to be very unambiguous and pure, and like, okay, I write down the facts and this is the facts, and I can discuss with you about facts but not about opinions, because if we talk about opinions in this field, then the cat's out
Shit
the door.
breaks down.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah.
Cannot do this. I cannot argue about the measurement value if I have a different opinion. So, and this is something that I feel like isn't taught enough, really. That I came more into contact with as soon as I sort of I had a couple other people at RSM that I talked to before, and then I visited a couple times, and that kind of opened my eyes a bit more to like the world of what to me felt more like the real world of how do people do business in general, because that's what I feel like that's in the end what drives an economy. Gave me much more perspective on how to keep in touch with people, how to see more relations between things in the real world. To me.
Right.
Because this is so fundamental in that sense, even though it's applied, but it's a small bubble that I feel like exists a bit outside of society. We all lean on it a bit, right? Because we know at some point it's going to do something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be cool, but like it's not necessarily part of this ecosystem of the rest of the world.
And so you just, I guess now that networking aspect is important for you to connect to like-minded people or to other people with different perspective as well, and to kind of build out your network, and then that's going to gets you a much better sense of how the world is working and what you can do within it than I say staying in that bubble, right?
Yeah, totally, and indeed, just like you said, I understand better where all of this, what I do, also fits in society.
Exactly.
Because it's sometimes hard to see from the lab. You need to talk to people in order to get there.
Yeah. Okay. So then the first thing. So just briefly, let's talk about that Hyperloop thing. Like how did it come to be? Like what? Yeah. Right. Like where do you take this initiative? How did it pop up?
Yeah. So I did a year of courses at the masters, and I wasn't really feeling too ready to start a thesis work, because that's already also pretty much a year. And then I noticed that there was a group of 4 guys, and they were looking for other people to join in participating in the Hyperloop competition after Elon Musk made that announcement, like, "Hey, we're gonna build a giant metal tube and
frictionless trains."
Sorry,
right? The frictionless traveling.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Indeed, with the point indeed of like, okay, student teams build vehicles that run in a vacuum tube,
right?
And with the idea of that, in general, that type of travel can be very much faster, more sustainable. That sort of the whole improved travel in every sort of way, almost. But no one's actually done it before, and no one took the effort of building that, really, because it's sort of a long shot. And then Elon graced us with like, okay, we'll build the tube because that's the most expensive part, and then we'll crowdsource all the pods that run into it over student teams, because usually student teams are pretty good at doing these sort of smaller but still bigger projects that do something new, because we don't have any attachments. We can try and fail, and nobody is bothered by it, right?
Exactly.
But we tried and we succeeded. So that sort of came about, and I and together with the 5 of us, we founded this Delft team then. And we made our full new approach, a new design to what a Hyperloop could look like. And then in the end, we participated in the competition.
What's that competition? Like, what do you actually do there? So it's just a number of groups throughout the world submitted their design and their work, or how did it work?
Yeah, so the process was that indeed we were allowed to make a reference design of what we thought in broad strokes what a Hyperloop pod could look like, ours. And it just went in, you sort of have several deliverables of these milestones, and then you're allowed to sort of pass into the next phase or not. That's sort of the way that went. So we got there, then we made a very detailed design. So according to our specs that we brought on before, like, okay, but now let's actually design it onto the last bolt, onto the last, this is what the pod looks like. This is all the data that we have. And we published literally a 300-page report on everything that went into it. So we made that report in like 4 months or so with like 15 people.
Sounds very intense.
It was really intense. But again, this curiosity, like, okay, never been done before. We did all the math, we did all the design. Then we came in sort of in the second place of the design competition of that part of the competition, the full competition, which was also the ticket to like, okay, now you're allowed to build it and you're allowed to ship it to the US and then participate in the competition there. So we did that. We built that pod in like 6 months or so.
This is funded by the university?
No. So this is funded by us in the sense that sponsorships and corporate sponsorships and yeah.
Really? So you also had to raise funding, basically?
Yeah. So in the end, it's funny when we look back at it, it felt like when we were doing it, it felt like a project. But looking back at it, it's pretty much a startup in the sense that at the start we all put in 300 euros just to get some of the smaller components to start with to mess around with. And it's really funny. At the end, we were calling every company in the book pretty much, mostly related to the stuff that we needed. Magnets, carbon fiber, electrical wiring, everything that comes with it. And very, very little people answered the phone, really. They were like, I literally called a magnet company because I designed a magnetic levitation system. I asked like, hey, I need a couple permanent magnets for this to work. And he literally told me, the guy like who sold the magnets said like, yeah, that doesn't sound real. That doesn't sound possible. Good luck, but bye.
No way.
Yeah. Hung up the phone, and I had the phone in my hand, like, what is this? Because like I even told him, I know this is real. I did the calculation, so please. But luckily, there were a couple other companies that did see the light and understood what we were standing for, and that we had evidence for all that we were claiming that we could do. And that got us started. And then as soon as we got in second place in the design competition, then they started calling us, So that's always how it goes, that you have to prove yourself, and then they would come to you like, okay. And then luckily we had enough partners to get this pod ready. And you think in the end, we had like 30 corporate sponsorships or so, usually in terms of providing materials for what we were doing. So like I said, the carbon fibers and the magnets and milling aluminum and like all those different parts that are usually very expensive to buy from a company,
right? Because
they require a lot of man hours or a lot of production costs that they would then donate to us,
right? So let's say that's the funding was the components to the pod, and that's really cool, man. I think it really shows that, let's say, you guys here are just so, you love building, you love seeing, and that's really
small.
nice. Yeah. And so, that's the type of, let's say, feedback loop that also gets me excited. So I'm curious, now you went from building something, making it work, to research, basically, a lot of research.
Yeah.
And like, which one do you feel more comfortable with? Like, where do you feel like you shine in terms of your own ways of working and personality, and what drives you?
It's a funny question, because I've obviously asked this question myself also, because otherwise I wouldn't know where to go. And I noticed that in both sides, I want a little bit of both. So when I was doing the Hyperloop engineering, I spent a lot of time researching and not just math engineering it, but physically engineering the magnetic levitation system, for example. But I felt that there was a component there that I really enjoyed because of building something, but I was doing research in it, right?
The best of both worlds.
Exactly. And I feel like the same I do now. So even though that this is definitely more oriented toward research side,
Right.
most of the problems that you solve daily are engineering problems on a different level. It's not like I'm daily building something with my hands, but I'm definitely controlling things that I feel like are engineering.
Right.
I don't invent new physics daily, right? But I use physics to do something for me, and that's engineering. And so I wouldn't be putting so much time into this if I didn't think that in the end, there's a large engineering component to it, and also something that is more tangible than doing fundamental physics research, which is very important, just not for me.
So that's what I was trying to get, to the bottom of. Like, are you, hardcore research? Because this is a new perspective on you from my side, where you have actually building the stuff, and it sounds very exciting. And I was just wondering to what extent you get some of that here as well. So it's good to hear that you get to the best of both worlds. So I feel like that's a very nice mixture.
Yeah, for sure. And the this project, we actually call it the Q quantum link or quantum internet demonstrator, because we want to demonstrate that an communication in the internet is possible, and that makes it much more real life than anything else that I feel like is in this building. To me, at least. So it's very much. Yeah, we want to put this out in the world. We want to give people a new internet, right? And you have to physically build it, and you have to engineer it. You also have to research how to do it well, obviously.
Right.
Otherwise,
super cool. So then, I guess, I mean, I think people listening to this, I think they're very intrigued. What would you tell someone that is curious, or maybe even interested in starting a career like yours? Like, what would you tell them?
Be okay with the fact that it's really hard. And I know that sounds, I don't want to pat my own back at all. It's just that I feel like if you underestimate to start with that it's really hard, then it's too much, and it comes as a wave, and you get maybe discouraged because it's sort of it's a long road. But it's a really fun road, at least to me. I get really excited about it every day still. And if you take it step by step, you get there. So don't be afraid of how difficult it looks, because you can always boil it down to smaller parts that you can understand, and then you take another step, and then 2 steps back, and then 1 step forward. You'll definitely get there. I also noticed that actually I had a talk recently with someone who just started a master's and was interested in. He approached me like, "Hey, I would like to know what's your take on someone." This is really appropriate, actually. I just realized that he asked me this exact question, but then from his perspective. I also found it very difficult, of course, to give to someone else this specific advice. But I noticed that people who start in this field, they have very little idea of what it is you actually do at the end of the day. So
they're just fascinated by it, and they just want to like work in it, but they don't know, let's say, what it takes or what
your daily work even entails.
Right,
exactly. At the end of the day. And I know that's maybe hard for anyone starting university and then understanding like, okay, but what is my job really at the end of the day? So I would encourage everyone to try to approach someone to explain more and maybe show you around of what it is that they do on a daily basis. It just gives you a lot more perspective of what it actually means. Although sometimes that may also be a bit discouraging, and I don't want to discourage anyone else, but because it's hard to sometimes be fascinated by something that you, as a starting out, cannot fully understand yet, right? So I get super fascinated by just seeing like this tiny blip on my screen.
Right.
And I can,
because you know what it means.
Exactly. I know the context. I know how hard I worked to get to that blip. And I know the consequences of this blip, even though you can't really show it, of course, to someone who's just in the lab and then see this extreme excitement about like this super seemingly benign thing. But I hope that even, the fact that I talk about it and that you see in my face that I'm excited about what I'm doing, that maybe that rubs off a bit on someone who starts off.
So you would say it's hard to describe what a daily, like, what are you doing on a daily basis? That's hard to describe. So if I put you on a spot and I ask you, like, to someone in the audience that's, maybe interested in it, and you had to describe your day, like, what would you say?
I mean, obviously, I can definitely try. I'm just, and I will.
Maybe it doesn't sound as interesting.
Exactly, that's what I mean. Like, it's really hard to make that sound sexy in a way that would encourage someone to enter this field, because it's always personally, it's this excitement that gets you going. And if I would want to describe what I do on a daily basis, it really is in a large denominator. You're bending physics to your will, right? I feel like I've said this a couple times now, but I do that by controlling a lot of electronics and machinery to do exactly what I want it to do at a certain moment in time. And I do this by writing software that then controls this machine, and the machine controls in the end the physics. So it is programming, and in programming electronical machines to send out pulses or send out electricity in that sense to a system that I then control. And I know, and that's of course the recipe book, I know exactly what to do in what order in order to get a response from this physics to get a measurement outcome, say, of a quantum state. Because that's in the end what I really want out of it. So that's the context that you need in order to do that work daily. So maybe from the outside it looks very monotonous, maybe, because all I am doing is, well, not all I'm doing, but I could be on a day, right? I'm sending all these commands to machines, and then they give out a measurement outcome to me. And then I interpret that, and I think, what should I do next? And then it's that's the level, that's what I mean about engineering as well. I feel like this is still really vague what I'm saying.
No, it's okay. But
it's always tough.
I think you said the sexy phrase is, you're bending physics to your will. Leave it there. It's okay.
Okay, then we'll leave it there.
It sounds very cool. So and
I'm using lasers too, so that's also
oh
cool.
Shit, that's cool, right? So
daily laser show.
Oh my God. So for sure, I mean, to me, it sounds super cool. So hopefully the audience also finds it pretty nice as well. All right. So some of the closing questions I have for you is, I'm a newbie. I'm with the audience. Like, I know very little. Like, I have a good high level perspective on some of these things, but I'm still lacking in a lot of different ways. So what is the question that, let's say, I just don't know enough to ask you about? Maybe something that you would have maybe liked to talk about, or just something that I just don't know enough to ask you about. Is there something that you think I missed?
No, if I'm being honest, I just want to compliment you a little bit on the way that we talk about this, because I feel like indeed, in a good way, you're an outsider to this very specific field, but I think you're asking the right questions on you're poking the bubble that I'm in. And try to see, like, okay, where can I get in? Like, how does this work? How does it work for you? And indeed, it is also for me. It's really hard to really be specific about these answers, because of course there's like this wad of knowledge behind me.
Exactly, the context that makes everything, makes these things matter to you, and makes these things make sense. Without that context, someone else, is just gonna, doesn't make any sense. So I guess from my perspective, I just ask these more high level questions because they say that's what I'm trying to get at. That's what I understand. But I feel like it's very exciting to also get into the details of it. I mean, it's just, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think something that that you can talk in length about, because it doesn't happen too much in this field, is like, okay, how do I monetize this in general? I feel like that's something maybe that's a little bit overlooked. By physicists, for sure, and by scientists, because it's not our job, obviously. But it is something that I think about, because I also realize that should be a thing in the next decades, obviously. And that's also one thing why I like talking to you and talking to sort of people from Erasmus in general, or Erasmus alumni, obviously, because they give me also a different perspective. I can tell you what's out there, and I encourage you to take that with you, and perhaps even, call me later and then ask me more questions, or then together we can figure out something if you have an idea. But obviously the other way around, this works too, that if I would now interview you about other business related things, or what are you looking for in investment, or
right.
something related to, but then I try to project it obviously to quantum tech and see if there's an avenue that you can pursue here that's interesting for people outside as well.
Yeah, exactly. And on this note, this is kind of like why I feel for a long time, our universities haven't connected in the level that I think they should. And I mean, maybe it's the distance. We are certainly collaborating on a number of levels. Yeah. But now, for instance, TU Delft is actually coming on campus, and we're starting a closer collaboration with them. And I think it's so crucial. You have on our side, we have the business people that just think that an idea will come and let's say if we need the tech people, we'll get the tech people. You have the tech people that just think the products will sell themselves. And and you also have that kind of like, you need need these two worlds to collide, and beautiful things can happen. So I'm happy about, let's say, coming on campus and then making, let's say, starting that collaboration there.
Right.
All right. So let's just closing question for someone who after this podcast wants to learn more about this and maybe about you as well. How do you kind of keep yourself educated, and what would you tell them? Like, where should they look, and where can they also find you and interact with you maybe?
Yeah, so if we talk about where to educate yourself on this field in general, of course, personally, I read sort of the bleeding edge, as in papers and that come out, but that's, of course, the level that you'll get to eventually. Mm-hmm. But definitely, I'm really happy that there are so many resources around now to learn about quantum computing. Microsoft has their own programming language. IBM has a really good set of sort of simulation software with a lot of background, and we have it as well. So QuTech also has this called Quantum Inspire, and there might even be something coming for the internet side of things as well. So be tuned for that. But it's something that we also want to carry out into the world of educate people on quantum tech. So you can go to QuTech website, search Quantum Inspire. IBM is a really good background, like I said. And in the end, as with everything nowadays, just Google about it. Look at some really good MIT videos.
Look on YouTube.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. And what about where can they find you if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get in contact with me, the best way is through LinkedIn. That's my really only sort of public face that I actively maintain nowadays. So find me there, just on my name. And obviously, I'm also at the QuTech website if you want to directly email me about maybe something a bit more quantum business-related things. But yeah, I mean, obviously, also I would love to hear from perhaps the people watching or anyone else that sees this. Like, if you have something that you want to be more interested about, business-related and quantum, please talk to me. Like, I feel like I really want to open these doors, just like Yes Delft is now coming on Erasmus, which I think is really great. I too want to be more in contact with also late in their study students to talk about this, because I want to explore this world as well from the other side. So
that's awesome.
Please hit me up. Yeah.
Kian, thank you so much for being here. It was amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk.
Thank you.
Thanks.